Hi ladies and gentlemen, welcome once again to Ancient Epics, the place where the greatest stories of humanity come back to life. Long ago, in the candlelit salons of Paris in the year 1697, a single tale slipped quietly between the pages of a small book and changed childhood nightmares forever. Most people today remember only a man with a blue beard and a forbidden store, yet few know that the author, Charles Perrault, hid inside his seemingly simple fairy tale a chilling truth. The story is built upon centuries of real murders committed by noblemen across France and Brittany, men whose castles still stand. Some say the brooding Château de Tiffages in the Vendée, others the ruined towers of Nantes, whose names were whispered in court records. Gilles de Rais, companion in arms of Joan of Arc, executed in 1440 for the murder of perhaps 100 children, and the lesser-known Connemore the Accursed, a 6th-century Breton count whose legend speaks of slain wives, and whose crimes were so terrible that even the judges dared not speak them aloud in full. Folk memory kept the tales alive for 1,000 years until Perrault dressed them in silk and velvet and gave them to the children of Louis XIV. Tonight, beneath the same winter stars that once shone over the Loire Valley and the dark forests of Brittany, the darkest of all French fairy tales awakens once more, the tale of Bluebeard. In a time when the forests of Brittany were deeper and the roads narrower, when the great standing stones of Carnac still drank the moonlight and travelers crossed themselves at crossroads, there lived a nobleman of immense wealth and fearsome appearance. His beard was not merely dark or black, a shade so unnatural that mothers pulled their children close when he rode past. Some said the color came from a rare mineral dye used in the ancient tin mines of Cornwall, a pigment rich with copper and arsenic that stained skin and hair for life. Others whispered that the hue was born of something far more sinister, something that no alchemist's fire could ever truly cleanse. Whatever the cause, the sight of that beard was enough to silence laughter in the village squares. Maidens turned pale, suitors found excuses, and even the boldest knights lowered their gaze. And the lord's castle glittered like a jewel upon its rocky promontory above the river. Towers of pale stone rose into the sky. Windows flashed with Flemish glass imported along the old trade routes from Bruges, and gardens bloomed with roses brought all the way from Damascus by Genoese galleys that sailed beneath the constellation of the ship. Gold, it is said, can gild even terror. In a modest manor house surrounded by apple orchards where the soil still carried the salt wind from the nearby Gulf of Morbihan lived two sisters renowned for their beauty and gentle manners. For her eyes held the soft light of early dawn and her laughter carried the sweetness of spring. Their mother, a widow of good family, had often been invited to the great castle, and one summer the Lord gave a magnificent feast that lasted 7 days and 7 nights. Musicians played upon viols and lutes, peacocks wandered the lawns displaying tails that mirrored the eyes of Argus in ancient myth, and tables groaned beneath venison taken from the royal forests, and honeyed wine shipped from the sunlit hills of Cyprus and amphorae sealed with Byzantine wax. The younger daughter, dazzled by the splendor she had never known, began to see the blue beard not as a mark of dread, but as a curious ornament upon a man who could command the world. When the Lord asked for her hand, her mother hesitated only a moment before the splendor won. The wedding was celebrated with even greater magnificence than the feast, and the flickering of 1,000 beeswax candles whose smoke rose like silent prayers toward the vaulted heavens. Soon the new bride crossed the drawbridge into the castle that would become both palace and prison. For a month, the days passed like a dream. She walked through halls lined with tapestries woven in arras depicting the labors of Hercules, touched harps that had once belonged to queens, and opened coffers filled with pearls the size of hazelnuts harvested by divers in the warm seas off Ceylon. Her husband, though grave and silent, showered her with gifts and never raised his voice. Then one morning he announced that urgent business called him away. Perhaps to the royal court at Versailles where the Sun King was building his golden cage. Perhaps to his estates in distant Poitou where the standing stones still kept their ancient watch. He did not say. With these, he told her she might go anywhere in the castle. Every door would open to her wish, every cabinet, every tower, every hidden garden beneath the yew trees older than Christianity itself. But from the ring hung one tiny key, fashioned of pure gold and curiously wrought with patterns that hurt the eye to follow. This key, he said, opened a little chamber at the end of the long gallery on the ground floor. That door alone must remain closed. Should she ever turn the key in its lock, his anger would be beyond anything she could imagine. He spoke softly, almost kindly, yet the winter light catching in his blue beard made the words feel colder than iron. Then he kissed her forehead, mounted his black stallion whose breath steamed in the frost, and rode away beneath a sky heavy with coming snow. At first the young wife felt only relief. She invited her sister Anne and her closest friends, discovering libraries filled with books bound in Cordova leather illuminated by monks long turned to dust, armories where swords from Damascus glinted beside Milanese armor tempered in the waters of Lake Como, and a chapel whose stained glass, crafted in Chartres, turned sunlight into rivers of sapphire and ruby that danced across the stone floor like living things. Days became weeks, and still the forbidden store was forgotten amid laughter and music. Yet there is in every heart a corner that longs to know what is hidden, a restlessness older than the first stories ever told around the first fires when the constellation of the Great Bear still guided hunters through the primordial night. One gray afternoon, when the wind moaned in the chimneys like the voices of drowned sailors from the nearby coast and her companions had gone home, the wife found herself alone in the long gallery. She told herself she would only look, only press her eye to the keyhole, nothing more. The lock turned with surprising ease, as though it had been waiting since the foundations of the castle were laid upon older, bloodier stones. The door opened inward upon darkness so complete that for a moment she saw nothing at all. Then her eyes adjusted, moonlight perhaps, slipping through a high-slit window that faced the standing stones on the distant moor. The air that met her was thick and metallic, like the breath of an old battlefield where iron had rusted for centuries. She stepped across the threshold, lowering the candle she had brought. She saw that the floor was black with dried blood, as though generations of sorrow had seeped into the flagstones. And in the center of the chamber, hanging from iron hooks driven into the walls, were the bodies of 6 women. Their rich gowns, once crimson, violet, and gold, were stiff with gore. Their hair, still braided with pearls from the Persian Gulf, fell across faces frozen in final horror. Each lured by the same splendor, each unable to resist the whisper of the little golden one. The youngest, who had vanished only the previous spring when the hawthorn was in bloom, still wore the myrtle wreath from her wedding day, now withered and dark, fell from her fingertip and struck the floor with a sound the young wife would never forget. Terror seized her so completely that she almost dropped the candle. She fled backward, slamming the door. But in her panic the golden key slipped from her trembling fingers and fell into the pool of blood at the threshold. Snatching it up, she ran to her chamber, locked herself in. She scrubbed it with rose water distilled from the castle gardens, with lavender soap brought by Venetian merchants, with fine sand from the hourglasses that marked the canonical hours. But the blood had soaked into the metal as though the key itself were alive and hungry. No matter how hard she rubbed, the crimson mark returned brighter than before, a silent witness that could not be silenced, like the accusatory stars that watched from the Breton night. That same evening, earlier than anyone expected, hoofs thundered across the drawbridge. The Lord had returned. His blue beard rhymed with frost that glittered like crushed sapphires, yet his eyes burned with a strange calm. He greeted his wife kindly and asked for the keys, saying he wished to be certain all was well, her heart hammering so loudly she feared he must hear it above the wind. When the little golden key reached his palm, he turned it slowly, letting the candlelight play upon the blood that would not wash away. For a long moment he said nothing. Then his voice, soft as falling silk yet colder than the dolmens on the moor, asked, "Why is there blood upon the key?" That she had dropped it in the kitchen. Any lie that came to mind. The Lord raised his eyes, and for the first time she saw in them neither kindness nor anger, but only a vast and ancient weariness, the weariness of a soul that had looked too long into the abyss. "You have seen the chamber," he said. "Tomorrow at dawn you will join the others." He locked her in the highest tower, the one whose windows looked across the frozen river toward the forests where she had once played as a child beneath the same stars that had watched over her ancestors since the days of the Veneti. Through the long night she wept and prayed, while the wind howled like the voices of the dead wives calling from the chamber below. Yet she was not entirely without hope. On the day of her wedding she had begged her two brothers, brave soldiers who served the king along the Flemish frontiers. She had made her sister Anne promise to watch from the highest tower for their banners of scarlet and gold. Now, as the first pale hint of morning crept across the sky and the constellation of Lyra faded in the west, she called to Anne, who had stayed the night in a lower chamber. "Sister Anne, climb to the top of the keep and tell me, do you see anyone coming along the causeway that crosses the salt marshes?" Anne climbed the winding stairs until her head emerged into the icy air. Far across the white fields nothing moved but crows circling above the ancient megaliths. "I see only the sun rising and the grass growing green," Anne called down, for that was the old country saying when no help was in sight. Minutes passed like hours. The young wife knelt, pressing her face to the cold stone worn smooth by centuries of frightened hands, while in the courtyard below the Lord sharpened a curved sword from Toledo steel, its edge singing as it met the whetstone ground from the red sandstone of the Loire. Again she cried, "Sister Anne, do you see nothing?" And Anne, tears freezing on her cheeks like tiny stars, answered, "I see only a cloud of dust far away on the road to the east." The Lord laid aside the whetstone and began to climb the tower stairs, his boots ringing like funeral bells upon the spiral-worn hollow by generations. A third time the wife called, her voice breaking like thin ice, and Anne leaned out so far she nearly fell. "Now I see 2 horsemen, no, 3, no, 4, riding hard beneath a banner of scarlet and gold, their armor flashing like the morning star." The Lord reached the door and thrust the key into the lock just as the first brother thundered into the courtyard, his horses' hoofs striking sparks from the ancient cobbles, blades that had been tempered in the same forges that once armed the knights of Charlemagne. The fight was brief and terrible. The Lord was strong and skilled, his blue beard streaming like a battle standard, and mercy had long ago fled that place, the blue beard spreading across the stones, like spilled ink beneath the first rays of a sun that had seen too many such dawns. Silence returned to the castle, and the low voices of her brothers, giving thanks beneath the winter sky that still held the faint glow of Venus, the morning star of hope. All the vast wealth of the castle now belonged to the young woman who had so nearly become its latest ghost. The bodies of the murdered wives were laid to rest with honor in the little chapel beneath stained glass that turned their white shrouds to rivers of color, and the priests sang the old Gregorian chants that had comforted the dying since the days of Clovis. The forbidden chamber was purified with fire and consecrated as a place of perpetual prayer, its door bricked up beneath a carved rose that still blooms in stone. This time a gentle lord whose beard was the ordinary black of ravens, and together they filled the castle with music and children's laughter until even the crows forgot to mourn and the standing stones themselves seemed to stand a little less solemnly. The little golden key was melted down in the castle, a reminder that some doors, once opened, can never truly be closed again, yet may still lead, by the mercy of heaven, back into the light. leaving behind only the faint scent of old roses and the echo of a warning carried on the wind through every age. Curiosity is a bright blade, and obedience, sometimes, the only shield between life and the abyss. Please consider subscribing to Ancient Epics and ringing the bell so you never miss the next forgotten tale. Thank you for watching.